thank you all for joining us. You know my wife, Emily, and below us here is our good friend, Satya, who is Emily's co-founder at We Are AMMA, and our friend, Jeffrey.
Hey, how are you?
So our ladies here have made us aware, but I just want to be clear. I got a lot of messages saying like how grateful people were that like I was leading a conversation about this. I'm not leading a thing. Emily's the one who actually made me aware, and I believe you and Santi have been talking a lot about what's happening with COVID-19 and the fact that partners in many places are not being allowed into the hospital, into the birthing room, and women are being forced to birth alone because of the outbreak. And that was completely new information for me. And we're starting something here on my channel called Man Enough Mondays. And I thought, what better way to talk about the responsibility, at least as a man, for our partners. And you can also, again, if you don't identify as a man, you can change that to whatever language best suits you. Partner. The idea is a support system and a support person. But I can only speak from my experience as a man, as I know, Jeffrey, you can. And I just wanted to have an honest, loving conversation, because I know that a lot of men have no fucking idea what to do when their wives go into labor. And the thing we do as men is we like pretend like we know. And we're like, oh yeah, we're good, we're gonna be fine, we're gonna be fine. And then it's like, you've heard the stories of men that like pass out.
Yeah.
When
you know, the number of texts I get from friends who are about to, whose wives are about to give birth, partners about to give birth, and they're like, I got this. I'm like, like, no problem, we're good. I'm like, no, it's not like Hollywood. It's not like the movies where boom, boom, wham, bam, it happens. And you also you can step up and have a role. And then I sent him a text of like 5 things that I, remember from my experience. And they're like, oh my God, this is gold. And I was like, yeah, you didn't know what you're getting into. And so I didn't know what I was getting into at all until it happened. So I think it's really important as men, especially if they're going to be the only person in the room in some cases, especially in some of the states that are only allowing one person in the room.
Yeah, no, that's what's kind of bizarre to me. I think when you were pregnant, and when Emily was pregnant, it was, you are preparing for the most important day of your life.
Yeah. Your
entire world as a woman. Oh, okay, bye.
Bye.
So from what she told me, because I'm not going to look at her now, her entire world. I mean, she was carrying our baby, and I was kind of hold on. Someone said turn the comments off. I'm going to turn these comments off. Hold on. There we go. There we go. I see your face now.
Yeah. Okay. Cool.
I was
just a bunch of emoji smiley faces going on there.
Yeah, basically.
By the way, this is my first Instagram live ever. By the way.
Is it?
Yeah.
I went. I think mine was like a couple of weeks ago, and I'm not.
Cool.
It's not. It was a scary thing for me. I was like nervous about it, and then last night for the first time I added somebody in, and it was really fun.
Yeah, I saw the one with that one you did was amazing.
But it was interesting for me because her entire life had changed, and in many ways my life hadn't. Right?
Yeah.
Like we were able to go off and continue our jobs and continue doing the various things that we need to do, but she was full-time 24 hours a day growing a baby, and there's a lot of anxiety I think that comes with that. And what I've been thinking about recently is I cannot even imagine doing that during a pandemic, and because it's already enough, like there's already so many shoulds happening, like you should be eating this, you shouldn't be eating this, you need to be doing this, you need to be walking 5 miles a day. Do you want a C-section? Do you want a home birth? Do you want to get an epidural? And all of these things. And then on top of the fact that you're trying to prepare for birthing a fucking human out of your body.
Yeah.
It's just a lot.
I think one of the things about the pandemic, or at least the quarantine, that it's occurred to me just in general, and then it can apply to this, especially for dads and probably for expecting mothers too, is just simplify. Everything in this time is about simplification, right? So all of that stuff that, if you can't get the perfect keto supplement for a thing because the store's closed or because Amazon is 2 weeks out. You're just like, oh, I'll just have a regular cup of coffee. And your whole life is just, to some degree, much more simple, right? We're growing a garden, going to get some chickens, etc. But everything just now strips away all of that those shoulds that you're talking about, because right now it's just about being, present and with your family and focusing on things that are important. I work 2.5 hours a day now instead of 6 or 8 or 10, because the other times I'm with the kids.
Good for you, man.
I'm trying
to figure that thing out.
But, well, at a minimum, it creates essentialism at its core, because you're like, I only have this much time before my 1-year-old wakes up, right? So now I've got, I think the point is though that, like, even with all the shoulds, if you're doing a home birth, you're doing a hospital birth or whatnot, it's don't, just give yourself the break and the pressure from all of that, and really just ease into keeping it simple, which is you're birthing a human. Keep it alive, be supportive, enjoy the beauty of it, be present with it. And that's as simple as it gets.
Specifically also for the men. And
yes.
I want to make sure that we're directing this conversation really honestly to men, but I have a lot of questions from women, because a lot of women are very scared and nervous right now that their husbands will not be able to be at the hospital.
Yeah.
In terms of, we have a lot of questions about, like, is it allowed in my state? Or we got a text last night from our friends in Oregon, who, I didn't even think about this, but they are actually not giving birth themselves, right? So they have, and so it's
right,
because of various reasons. Now they're having to figure out how that's going to work. Is she going to even be allowed in, right? Her husband's not going to be. There's just a lot of crazy things happening right now. So to answer most of these questions, Jeffrey and I, we don't actually know all the states or all the cities that are allowing or not allowing birth partners into the room. However, it seems to be a hospital directive.
Yeah.
So it seems to not necessarily be a state ordinance, but a hospital ordinance, and every hospital is different. So based on where you are, the best thing you can do is call in advance and find out what their rules are based on when you're due. And if they are not letting a birth partner in, then start a petition.
Yep.
And we're seeing a lot of success with that. So start a petition, share it. If you need help amplifying it, I know we are AMMA will amplify it. We'll amplify 100%. It, because this is a really important thing. And this is arguably one of the most important, if not the most important day of your life. But I want to pivot over to men and being supportive birth partners. Yeah. So I'd love to hear, Jeffrey, about your experience, because I think our experiences were very similar except different. So we both, Emily and I, for both births, had home births. Yeah. Although the second time we actually had to transfer last minute. I know you guys also did a home birth. Yeah. The difference between you and I was I didn't read any books and you read every book.
Actually, I had a couple of great teachers, but that directed me to a couple of books that I read with the fury of, oh shoot, I've got 2 weeks, maybe it's a week, who knows, right? The fact that there was no firm deadline as to when my daughter was coming was sort of the biggest thing, because you're like, oh, I got to get this in, right? It's like cramming for an exam without knowing when the test is to some degree. Yeah, and so I think the difference, I don't know about you, but I felt like before Satya said she wanted to have a home birth, I was open to it, and I wanted to support her in any way she wanted, just from the outset. But I had in my mind the conception of what that meant. I thought 1850s hot water, tub. Like, I didn't know what it was like. And I also didn't know what a hospital birth was like because of all of the, Hollywoodification of birthing. And then we actually watched more than books. We watched a bunch of the movies, documentaries that were really useful, at least to showing both sides of the extremes, right? Like what it could be like at home, orgasmic 8-hour births, which, with swimming with the dolphins, all that stuff. And you're like, okay, that's not happening. But then also the extreme of like all the interventions that happen in a hospital. And then in between, I got comfortable with, forget home birth, but I got comfortable with being involved and realized that I had a responsibility to be involved because of that gap in the middle. The fact that there's not a lot of information in the middle. The fact that
I remember being super nervous about it.
About birth?
About home birth. About home birth.
Oh, yeah.
Well, I mean, I was nervous about birth itself,
yeah.
for sure. But I remember, because it's such a massive thing. And I think it's also hard for men because I think we are socialized. I'm writing my book right now about this, but we're socialized to think that we have to protect women.
Yeah.
That's like part of our thing, right?
I had plan B, C, D.
Like we have to protect them. So therefore, like, as if they can't protect themselves, as if they can't, they don't have an idea of what could be safe or not. So it's interesting. For me, I had to really repress a lot of these things that were coming up because it's not my fucking body. It's hers. Even though it's our baby, she is the one giving birth. And I noticed a lot of things coming up that was like, I was almost possessive of her body and what she was wanting to do with it. Because I was like, well, you can't do that. Like, well, we can't, like, what if that happens? And then, you know, because at the end of the day, when men are nervous, right, it turns into overprotection, right? It turns into us like, you know, overcompensating to try to, like, you know, as an exercise of masculinity, to try to be like, well, no, well, we have to do this and this and this. I mean, I even heard about guys who during home birth had paid for an ambulance to be waiting outside. I mean, like, just the stories I've heard are incredible.
Yeah.
But I noticed in me that I had to repress a lot of my, like, male urges to protect and to make sure everything was okay. When in reality, like, she is in tune with her body. And it's my job to support. And I think that's the big key word for us here is, like, as men, how do we support in this process? How can we be active participants and support versus being the ones that have to dictate everything? And I've heard a lot of men say that they won't let their wives have home births. I've actually seen men demand that their wives have home births. I mean, at the end of the day, I think it's about consultation, but it's not up to you or I as the partners to dictate anything. It's about figuring out a safe space.
Yeah, I'd love to introduce a new word to this, which I think is hard for men, because the word support, like support your woman's support, like that has a lot of connotations to it or a lot of definitions that it can be, you know, people can choose, right? And I think especially as it relates to birth, but also the pregnancy, the whole pregnancy is really be of service. So if you think about being of service, you know, and this is a pathway to happiness and bliss and joy in a different way, because you're no longer of yourself. You're no longer of your fears, of your own emotions and such like that. To your point, like I went through all of that. I went through the plans, all the different plans. I knew exactly how long the timing would be, at the time of night it would be, if there was you know, because we live up in the mountains too. So I was like, we're 35 minutes away. So I was T minus 40. It was like, if something's going wrong, we're out, you know, kind of thing. I had it on a whole checklist and everything, the way my mind works. And yet all of that went away when I thought about being of service. And so luckily Satya and I had gone through a bunch of stuff earlier on in our relationships that we learned this, and I learned this and such. And but more profoundly, I learned from our birthing coach that how to be of service to a birthing mom, a pregnant mother, and that's the key. Like that changes the definition, because it's so much more clear to what to be. How do you be of service, right? Being of service isn't of your own making. It's not of your own design. It's truly following the lead of the person who and responding to their needs.
I think we should actually let's think about that word, right? Service. By the way, I love your water bottle.
And my house too.
The be loved. Be loved.
Be loved.
So just the idea of being of service, right? As it relates to pregnancy and birth, like what are the prerequisites for that? Right? Because I think that it's important to, like, at what point do we take ourselves out of it? Like, can you talk a little bit about your mindset around being of service, at least as it related to birth and Satya?
Specifically, it literally is it's a weird thing, and I think most guys probably can't imagine what it's like until they start doing it. But it's just stripping all preconceived notions, all judgments of what is needed in a given moment away. It is listening to the needs of the partner, and really, it's saying yes. You have that great quote tattooed on your arm that we now have magnets on our refrigerator, and I use it all the time. But the fear I think most men have of being in service, which means to serve, just to be there for anyone and do for them what they need, is that they think that they're not going to have enough time, that that it's going to get in the way of everything else they need to do, whether it be work, sleep, watch a baseball game, you name it, right? Go out with their buddies, et cetera. And they think it's going to disrupt their lives, and now they no longer have control. And it's true. You will no longer have control, but you gain the ultimate control, which is you now have chosen to be of service. So the control is switching that mindset. And it's about a priority of that. And so for 9 months, and then eventually the lesson gets greater, because for 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, I'm sure 18, 20, 30, 50 years, you're of service to your kids. But in that moment of this birthing period, if you choose and you can do anything you want, right? You can run a marathon, you can train to do that. So you just got to choose to be of service for this, at least for this window of time, and try it out. And if you try it out, you learn that it is the greatest joy you'll get, right? And then it means everything. It means, sitting and doing meditations at night so she can sleep better. It means running to the store to get whatever she needs. It means making her a cup of tea. It means getting up when she gets up in the middle of the night and just talking and being with her while she's pregnant and can't sleep because it's the last 2 weeks and all she wants to do is get the kid out of her belly, and then there's a being of service, which is a proactive mentality of listening and learning to the wisdom and the teachers who are around you, whether it's documentaries, books, teachers, et cetera, and being prepared for birth. And we had an incredible checklist that we put together, and literally,
I can only imagine between you and Santia how amazing your checklist was.
Yes, and the moment birth started, tear it
out
up,
the window.
Throw it out the window.
Yeah.
Because she threw all the foods I prepared, broths, yogurts, this, that, and the other thing, all of it to as the clock was winding down and she could digest less and less but needed to be nourished. She vomited in the first 30 minutes and couldn't eat anything for the next 24 hours. So,
and that's interesting. I love that test for you. So for anyone who's just watching this right now or just tuning in, Jeffrey is a world-class chef and restaurateur. And so, of course, then that's the thing that happens for you, which is food is also your medicine, right? That's your offering, right? So that's the thing that you have to give her in some ways. That's like your great gift is I can feed her and prepare her. And it's the one thing she couldn't eat. She couldn't do at all during birth.
About 30 minutes before the last push, we found a honey stick, and it was like the only nourishment she had in that time, and literally. She was it saved her and allowed her to get a little push, but that was it. So tell me a little bit about your, what was service meant to you, and what was Maya's birth like, and how did you, I don't know much about the details of it. Yeah.
For us, it was interesting because our story started with, I was born a C-section at Cedars-Sinai Hospital here in LA.
Wow.
So interestingly enough, my entire life, without realizing it, I assumed that was the way you're born. It was just, I heard my mom talk about it. I took 36 hours. She tried. She really wanted to have a natural vaginal birth, and I just didn't want to come out. I was super comfortable. And I heard her tell this birth story for a long time. And what I didn't realize for most of my adult life as I was hearing her tell this birth story was that even though she talked about me being a cesarean and how lucky she was and how grateful she was and how my dad came and put my cheek next to her cheek because she couldn't feel anything, there was always a little bit of sadness in her voice that she failed. And I didn't realize that until Emily was pregnant. It was this weird thing that my mom always talked about being a C-section, and I just thought that was how all babies were born. Right. I mean, just as a dude, it's not something we think about all the time.
No.
And I was like, oh, okay, well, my wife will probably have a C-section. That was one of the first things I thought of when she started talking about her birth plan. But then I realized as I was talking to my mom how desperately she wanted to do it on her own, and in fact, she felt like she couldn't. And then that confused me. I was like, well, because I don't know, because we're not taught learning anything about birth as young boys or teen boys or young men or men. The only, like the vagina is associated with sex and porn, and that's it, right? That's why you hear a lot of men go like, oh, I don't want to be in the room, or I don't want to watch that. I'll never be able to see. And I'm just like, you're missing out on the coolest thing in the entire world.
It is the coolest thing. It is.
But going back, but it was the first time I learned a little bit about all of the shoulds that happen with women during birth. With my own mom, who 36 years later still has a little bit, I think, of guilt that she let me down because she didn't do it naturally, which is not the case.
Right.
And that's where I learned about all the things that Emily was feeling. So we started watching the documentaries, and she said, I'm really feeling, for me, like a home birth might be a good thing. And my first response was like, oh, hell no. Which is so interesting considering I'm such like a proponent for it now. My first response was like, no, like as if I could say no, first of all. Because it was because of this narrative around it, right? Like the 1800 midwife, like, are they even doctors? Are they capable? And then the more I learned about it, the more I realized like, wow, not only is this safe, but if this is something my wife wants, I need to go all in and support her for it. And if it happens the right way, then my God, like how amazing would it be to not be hooked up to machines and to be able to sit on our bed and have this experience. So that was like the framework for me, is unlearning a lot of what I learned about birth via my mom and about what the world was telling us, and learning through Emily's eyes what felt right. And I fell in love with the process. So just like you, like I realized like I was shooting Jane the Virgin almost every day. I was building my companies. And while I wasn't able to be there all the time, what I was able to do for Emily was always show up. I showed up to every single midwife appointment, every doula appointment, the little mini birthing class that we did, that we had to crunch into a weekend because my schedule didn't allow for it to happen because I was working 14 hours a day. And what I realized was that was my way to be of service. But but it also, I have to be real, it wasn't also just for her, because I wanted to be an active part of it, right? Like I felt like this was the beginning of me becoming a father. Like the pregnancy was the beginning of me being a dad. It wasn't, and I think a lot of times as men, we think about becoming a dad when we hold our baby for the first time.
That's the mythology of this.
It's the mythology of it. But for me, it was like, oh wait, I can start being a dad now. Like the baby's inside of her. It's my time to start to think about that, to talk to her, to pray for her, to figure out, like, to go to these appointments, to see her on our ultrasound, to figure out how I can be, of service or supportive. That was exciting for me. And then when it came time to it, we ended up having and I'll skip forward 9 months, but we had a beautiful home birth. She was in labor for 30 hours. And I fell deeply and madly, even more so, in love with my wife because I saw what was possible. And then we had this incredible experience where, the midwives and doula were there. I mean, Maya was born with the cord wrapped around her neck, which evidently is very common, but was fine. She needed a little bit of air to kickstart her, her lungs. Right. But aside from that, like, it was an incredible experience. And then on the flip side, we were expecting the same thing for Maxwell, but at the last minute, she had something called prodromal labor, which is basically, it's what they call false labor. And she was in labor for 3 days, basically. Wow. And we ended up transferring to the hospital at the last minute. And on the car ride, she dilated from 2 centimeters to 7 centimeters in 30 minutes. Of course. So it's like Maxwell was like, no, I want to be born where you were born, Daddy. But then she delivered on her own. And I can talk about that and the physical experience shortly. But my question to you is, what were some things that you did that helped in the actual process of birth?
The process of giving birth?
So let's fast forward to birth, right? Because I think, because we're talking kind of in general, I want to know, like, because you're such a hands-on person, what was the actual physical birth for you?
Sure.
What were you doing?
I'll do one thing just as a response to your, like, lead to the 9 months before.
Anyway, can I have the charger for this, sweetheart? By the way, this is going to die.
The 9 months before, so just as I want to make mention of something I think you said, but it's in some cultures, circumcision is a rite of passage at an older age. Bar mitzvahs are rites of passages. Confirmations, all these things are rites of passage. The first time you have sex is a rite of passage for men, right, to some degree. Going to your first baseball game with your dad is a rite of passage. These things, these constructs, right? Becoming a dad in real time is a rite of passage that is, to your point, has been celebrated as holding your baby and handing out cigars, right? And
yeah.
And by the way, that's not a bad. There's nothing wrong with that, right? Like I remember getting a haircut in the Senate, Russell Senate building in D.C. one time. My brother and I were on our way to the Supreme Court, and some guy comes in as a senator, and he comes in. His wife had just had a birth, and he's giving out cigars in the barber shop. And I remember I was 19, and I remember being like, wow, like how like wonderful that is, how American that is. I'm in the Senate, the guys, and I was like, and that stuck with me, right? I was like, that's when you have a baby, is when this is the thing you do. Well, guess what? The whole thing is a rite of passage, and it's just longer than that instantaneous moment. And to your point, it's learning about the process. And this is how I'll segue to the process. It's learning, it's finding those teachers, it's finding all the resources. I'll never forget the day that our midwife, we were on a midwife visit, and who, by the way, is Yoda. We have our midwife is the longest operating midwife in the state of California. She was her certificate is number 56, her license, and for about 18 months it was midwifery was neither certified or not for a while, and then in the early 80s it became illegal, and then 18 months later it became legal. And in that 18-month period, she actually got arrested for midwifery in California.
Whoa.
Yeah, and she's delivered maybe 4,000 babies here over 40 years. She's Yoda. I met her, I fell in love. And I was like, this woman is Yoda. Like, she's it's so smart and wise. And I'll never forget this is a part of the process is she took Satya's belly at about 8.5 months and drew the wish and the position on Satya's belly in perfect form, like nailed where the heart was, the head, the position, also. And she did this all without use of any technology other than a stethoscope and her hands. And she didn't even need the stethoscope to listen, but to the heartbeat. And she taught me that as well. But when she found the heartbeat within 3 seconds every time, and our OBGYN had to use ultrasound, and like not a knock there, but just I was like, wow, technology has helped us outsource like true wisdom. And this woman chose me, and I was like, that is so cool and tangible that it got me hooked into the whole process of, particularly of home birth, and also what was going to happen to Satya. At the same time, we were taking classes from a woman in Santa Barbara named Tracy Schmidt, who is another, if Mary Jackson is Yoda, she's probably Obi-Wan Kenobi, right? Like, and Tracy Schmidt we took 6 weeks of classes, 4 hours one night a week, and we did the whole thing. And it wasn't Lamaze, it wasn't breathing, it was all stuff. She taught me how to be of service. And so in that process, she was actually, it occurred to me about session 2, where she was like, oh, she's not training Satya. Satya knows what she's doing. She's training me and all the other guys in this room. And so in a very matter-of-fact way, I had learned that the basics of labor, like what generally happens in different time periods. I learned that there's pre-labor and what that looks like, and what I needed to do during that period of the time. I learned what transition looked like and what that was going to be, and still was not prepared for it, but definitely was aware of the signs and what was going to happen. As she described it, she said, when your wife is ready to run out into the driveway fully naked and leave the birthing area, that she's in transition. I was like, okay, so that's a check, like whatever that looks like. And then I sort of knew what pushing was going to be like, just from the way she described it, the videos we watched and such like that. And then she gave me some setups to do what to do in those periods. And so, and then there's no, other than having the information repeated 3 or 4 times, as the old phrase goes, tell me and I'll forget, show me I might remember, involve me and I'll understand. And in this case, it was like, I kind of remembered because she showed me, right? And telling me, it sort of zoned out. But as soon as I was involved, I immediately understood. All the wisdom was there because of the repetition of the showing that she'd done. And so, and everything else went out the window. But the main thing for me during the 24 hours that Satya was in labor was doing all the supportive things. So just following her lead, seeing what she needed, whether she needed me to rest on me, she needed to lay down, and not putting any prescriptions onto it at all of like, oh no, you're supposed to do this because you're in transition, et cetera, et cetera. The only thing that which
is another trap for us.
Correct, because you learn all this wisdom.
Once we learn it, we know we're now doctors.
Totally.
Yeah.
And I still consider myself a bit of a doctor, but I know that during labor, that's not the role, right? I'll tell you, the only thing that was not kind of from that world was Satya in transition was very, very long transition. And at one point she got so tired and when I say stressed, but her bottom lip started to quiver, like literally because she was just so like, didn't know, she's going through so much and she was so out there. She didn't run into the driveway. But in that moment, and I know my wife well enough, and luckily we've been together long enough that I could kind of predict this. And I said to her, this came from a different place. This came from a place I have no idea, but it was just by being present that it came up. And I just said to her, I said, you're exactly where you're supposed to be right now. Tracy told us you were going to be there. And knowing my wife well enough, she likes progress and milestones and such like that. And the fact that I gave her a milestone, even though it was vague and even though there's no end in sight, that she was exactly where she needed to be, she then picked up and zoomed out and took a couple hours, but she was it was that lip quivering was the bottom of that transition for her. And I think it was just good timing that at that moment, that wisdom came to me and said, you're exactly where you need to be. Like you're doing great. You're exactly where you need to be. Without it being false, like there were no negative signs. She wasn't, there was no danger or whatnot.
Yeah.
I'll also never forget that Mary came over. I called Mary at 3 a.m. and I was like, I called Mary at midnight, and then at 3 a.m, Mary got over and she was like, came up, set up shop, knew what she was doing. She said, I'm going to take a little nap. I was like, wait, but we're in labor. We're doing, and she's like, and Mary knew what she was doing. I was like, come on. I was getting a little frustrated. I was getting a little bro-like. I was just like, no, I'm paying you. You need to, be here and tend to my wife. And what I realized Mary was doing was she was just conserving her energy, because in go time, this woman literally was like Michael Jordan lacing up for a championship game, and she looked 40 years younger. Like her energy and her glow and her possession in that moment. It was like watching an Olympic athlete. I've never seen anything like it in my life. I was so impressed that she was I was watching a professional. It was incredible. It was just, it was amazing. So I learned like, even in that moment of like, of what's it called, entitlement as a male of I'm paying you to be here. I was like, oh no, I'm wrong. Like, and I figured it out. And it was that process then, to your point, was like, all of it was all that learning that you did ahead of time, but without applying it. It was letting it kind of come through as needed.
Thank you for sharing that, man. That's awesome. A lot of, I'm looking at some of these questions, and there's a few questions from men here that specific to home births versus hospital births. And
you want to talk about them?
And yeah, well, there's one question from Alex who said, my wife said on having a home birth, but I'd feel so much more comfortable with a hospital delivery. Obviously, I'm not the one delivering the baby, but I feel like a medical professional should be there. What should I do, and should I be feeling nervous? And first of all, Alex, dude, that's an awesome question.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure both Jeffrey and I felt the exact same thing at one point, as I think all men have, because we're like socialized to think that this is the way it has to be. What I would say is like, there is no one way to have a baby.
I agree.
And I would say that any way the baby comes out is an awesome way for the baby to come out at the end
It's
of the
natural.
day.
It's all natural.
Like whatever, if the baby's like me and I was born a C-section, to whether your wife does a completely natural vaginal birth, to whether she does it at home, to a hospital, to whether she has an epidural or needs drugs or not. I think this whole idea of which way women should deliver and men having a say or an opinion about it is something that's got to go.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, like, I don't know any man that could withstand that. And it's not our role. We can talk about it, and we should talk about it. But I would just say that I would also do a lot of searching about home birth, because midwives are medical professionals.
Yeah,
exactly. They are medical professionals. They're nurses. They're trained nurses, and I can tell you the first thing our midwife told us, and I don't want this to all become about home birth either, but the first thing our midwife told us was to not be attached to having birth at home.
Exactly, 100%.
The first thing, and she looked at me when she said it also. She was like, almost like, oh, okay. Like she looked at me to make sure that I didn't, mansplain or whatever I was going to do. But the first rule of home birth is to not be attached to having birth at home, which I thought was brilliant, right?
100%.
Like, it's recently my therapist came on and we did an Instagram Live about anxiety, and he says, like, the best way out of an anxiety attack is to try not to have one. Right?
By the way,
it's impossible, right?
Yeah.
And then just the thought of it is like, let it happen. And then you're like, oh, so just to even think about, oh, well, the rule of home birth is to not worry about having a home birth or not. And the baby's going to be born where the baby wants to be born.
Yeah.
I thought was magical and helpful for me.
I'd say I agree that, and one thing to that point, which takes it a little further, our midwife, as concerned as she was for Satya's well-being, she made it very, very clear to both of us, including the mother, that she was most concerned for the well-being of the child. And that gave me a lot of confidence that she knew what she was going to, like choices she was going to make in the process. Yeah. But it also, to your point, in looking, you in the eye, she made it very clear to me and to Satya that while you're important as the mother, the baby's health is what I'm here for.
Number one.
I have a priority focus higher than you guys. There's a divine being who's about to get birthed here, and it's my job to make sure that they're healthy and safe. And you're like, whoa, like one is midwife, no midwife, doctor, trust is there. And two is you realize it's not about you, right? This is what being of service is not being about you.
And that's the key. You just hit on that, is that's not about us.
One thing, it isn't. And it's not even about, and I say this with all respect to mothers, it isn't about the mother in that moment. The child has to be born, and we have to make decisions that are, to your point, are unattached to the care of this infant. And it's the greatest microcosm lesson that is going to serve you well in being a parent later, which is, you forsake as much as you need to in order to create the happiness and health of your kids, not just this infant, but later on as 2-year-olds and 3-year-olds and such on. One thing, just a note about home birth is you're not alone, right? Like it's your point. It's midwife and doula and maybe someone else and whatnot, and you're not alone. And so you shouldn't be alone, right? If you can prevent it, right? And midwives are accomplished professionals. And up until recently, 5% of births happened at a hospital, 95% happened at home, and the flip has happened the other way. That's not a conversation to be had. It's all births are natural. Your C-section is natural. All of it's natural. And once you get that in your head and you remove any of the stigmas either way, then you're free to go.
And I've told my mom this, and Mom, if you're watching this right now,
which I'm sure she is.
I turned out amazing, right?
Yeah.
You did it. It doesn't matter how I came into this world, and it doesn't make her any less of a mom or any less of a woman based on how this happened. So I love you, Mama.
I want to say something out there to families who also who are thinking about like scheduled C-sections and are afraid of pain in childbirth and stuff like that and want to do it in that regard. I think it's, if you're ultimately concerned about the health of the baby and want to bring this baby into the world, and you have anxiety and fear about all these other things and you just don't know if you're up to the task, that's great too, because again, it's not about you. I mean, if you think about women who are scheduled C-sections and parents who are, and people who are judging them from a different perspective, you're like, do you think they want to live with a scar in their back? Like, no, like that's crazy. It's just that
there's so many things that go into it.
Yeah.
And it's an important thing to talk about now, because what's happening now is a lot of hospitals are scheduling the mothers to come in, right? So
right.
it's like a scheduled C-section, but it's a scheduled induction in many ways.
Wow.
Because of the safety protocols that have to happen, right? And again, it's and I want to be careful here, because also these hospitals that are doing this are not doing this in a negative way to try to hurt fathers and mothers and create a shitty experience for the birth. They're doing it out of protection, because because this is a scary pandemic and this is a virus, and they don't want moms and dads to get it, and they don't know where anybody's been. And all of that, unfortunately, is just adding to the intensity of the birth experience, because it's already scary.
Oh my goodness.
Like, birth is a super scary thing, like, for everybody.
Yeah.
For the husband, for the mom who's got to, it's 20 marathons in a day. And then you add a pandemic onto that, and it becomes a really, really tough thing. And ironically, the most important thing, from what Emily's told me, in birth is being able to find your inner peace and calm and your zen and relax. And that's so hard to do when you have people walking around you in hazmat suits, or or knowing or watching CNN or Fox News or whatever you choose to watch, and seeing the amount of deaths that have happened that day, or wondering if what side of the hospital wing is being shut off because of the pandemic. So all of that said,
and by the way, there are 400,000 people. There's what, 15,000 people today right now going through that. Is that right? Is that the right number? I think that's right. It's a huge number of people today going through this experience.
We had 2 friends give birth last week.
Wow.
2 friends. Wow. Now, we're not going to be able to see those babies for quite a while, but we see them over FaceTime. But the amount of stress, and one was a home birth, and one of our friends was like, I am not going to the hospital no matter what. She was just set on it. She's like, I'm doing a home birth. And then the other friend went and got induced.
Right.
Both babies turned out perfectly.
And they're going to be...
There's not one way to do it.
Yeah,
both fathers showed up perfectly. But it's a real thing and I want to just acknowledge the moms that are watching this, that are going through this right now, and validate your feelings. And if your birth partner, and maybe he or she can watch this later, but I think it's also important to validate the birth partner's feelings here.
Oh, 100%.
Because right now, I can imagine if we were pregnant, I'm a fixer. I would not know what to do, because nothing is in my control.
It would be
right? And
crippling anxiety.
And I don't, and so I want to acknowledge to all the guys and the women and the birth partners out there of a woman who's about to go give birth in the next week to 6 weeks. There's a lot of tension and anxiety around that, and that's an important thing to look at and to not push down, because if you push it down, it's gonna bubble up, and it's gonna not be good. And so it's important to talk about it. It's important to talk to your friends about it. Talk to a therapist about it. Have open conversations about it, because then that fear and that anxiety, it doesn't fester and grow and become toxic.
Just a great technique. A friend of ours who passed this last year, but Sean Stevenson, the 3-foot giant, had a technique whenever you're in the weeds on something like this, is just look at each other and say, what can we find funny about this? And to your point, and then that helps release the tension. It doesn't make it go away. It doesn't mean that the reality isn't there. It doesn't mean that the real thing's there, but you can now connect together and find that reality. One thing, and in the case of, I think of what, people walking around in hazmat suits is freaking scary, but it's also quite dystopian and sort of humorous. Like, who would have thought that you'd be giving birth in this environment? And you can find some humor in it. You'll at least it'll relax you a little bit. It'll release oxytocin, all the love hormones that you need in order to birth. And I think that one thing about birth partners is if you think of your role as really the doula and not the doula being the doulas are there to support the birth partner, to support the person who's giving birth, really, like when you think about it. And if your job is to be of service, then you need to find those moments to create a safe container, a safe environment, a humorous one, a loving one, all the kissing, all the hugging, and maybe no hugging, no kissing, depending on what she needs. But at the end of the day, your job is to make that laughter, to make that experience, despite what's going on around. Pardon the pun here. You have to create a cocoon around your partner, and that's your job is create protection, and in that protection, have it being loving, have it being kind, have it being of service, have it being fun, all of it. That's your job. That's your only job. So you do whatever it takes to make that happen. I
love that, man. I want to talk a little bit because we have about 8 more minutes left before Instagram Live shuts us down. I learned the hard way that you have 1 hour. So you can't just broadcast all day long.
Pull the hook.
So I want to talk about the magic question, which is informed consent.
Yeah.
And, and again, we're going to be hearing a lot, I'm sure, in the next 6 months of increased C-sections, of all types of medical interventions happening. The body, I mean, you can imagine the body is a very sensitive thing, right? And if you are tense and you are like scared and nervous, then of course your body is not going to be open, and it's not going to release the chemicals that it needs to open up and to give birth the right way. And I can only not the right way, the way that maybe it was intended if there wasn't a pandemic happening.
Yeah.
So I'm curious what you've learned, and I can talk about mine as well, about what happens if you're in a hospital and you are a woman and your partner's there or not there, and the doctor says, this isn't working, I have to do it this way. What are some of the rights that you've learned that Satya had or that Emily had when you transfer to a hospital?
Yeah, and by the way, we might want to just put a little pin on this to say we can follow up. I think be useful to follow up the one-sheeter on some of the bullet points of things that we like process and all these other things, because you can't cover it all in an hour talking. Yeah. It's not storytelling, but there might be some useful stuff in there we could share if people are interested.
So just if you're watching this, just follow We Are AMMA. They'll be posting a lot. Emily and Satya will post a lot of stuff, a lot of this type of stuff, and the whole We Are AMMA is really just a resource.
It's a great resource, and then if and I think and for birth partners too, guys and not moms alone. Just really quickly, I think the most important thing to do is sit down ahead of time and write up a birth plan and a list of things that desires that you want for your birth, whether it be at home or at the hospital. And the two don't have to be changed. They should be grand enough and it's aspiring enough and important enough that they should live if they were happening at home or at the hospital or in your car on the way to the hospital, because that's happened too. And we have a funny video we saw about that one. Having said that, that birth desires should be then another list of specific things that are related to the hospital. Version could be for hospital, and sign it. Both of you should sign it and date it, and that gives it a little bit of gravity. So it was thought about ahead of time, and you could show that. And then, like any other experience in life, you got to go into the hospital mentality thinking that these people are on your side and it's not antagonistic, even if you've come from a learning or a training that says this is not what I want. Because to your point, once you're going to the hospital, whether it's transitioning from a home birth or you got to commit. And when you're committed, that means you're looking to build consensus and a team. And the people on the team are the nurses, the admissions people.
They're on your side, man.
They're on your side.
They want the baby to be born happy and healthy.
Agreed. And if you assume the worst in them, you're going to get the worst out of them. If you assume the best out of them, and probably you're not going to get anything different from them. It's just your experience of what it's going to be like. Yeah. At the end of the day, that's probably truer than anything else. But they're not going to change because of you from what they're required to do and what they're thinking they're going to do. What they can change, though, is how the experience is for both of you, and that then changes the dynamic of the birth itself. And so I think that to the degree that you go in and try to build teamwork and consensus and come in with love and come in with kindness and empathy, right? It's happening to you, but you know what? It's also happening to them 20, 30, 40 times at the same moment, as well as a pandemic going on the other side of the wing of the hospital. I think it's really important that you go in that. I think if you do those two things, have a list of your desires, assuming that all of them are not going to get met, that some they're going to have to do that aren't going to meet. And then just ask for things. Say, hey, can we do this? We would really appreciate if we could do this.
And to this point, I want to and to that point, I want to tie into that asking, right? Because let's just say, because birth looks so different for everybody. Every woman has a different experience. So this idea of informed consent, right? And this question, let's just say a doctor says, it's time for a medical intervention. As a woman and as the partner, you have the right to ask a question about that. So you can say, is this a medical emergency, right?
Yep.
Like and you can ask questions. I think it's important. Doctors are amazing, but there's also a lot of other things happening at the hospital right now. So it's important to take ownership of the fact that it's your body, it's your baby, and you can say, am I at risk? Is my life at risk if we don't do this? Or you can ask these questions. And for anybody who's curious about that, our doula, Ivy, she has a panel on informed consent on the AMMA website, the weareamma.com. And it's a really, really important thing to look at because a lot of people don't know, right? A lot of people don't know. And it's just important to be able to say, like, can you tell me more about that? Unless it's a medical emergency and that needs to happen right now. So I think that's also just a really important thing. So go to the We Are AMMA website if you're interested in that. If you are pregnant or getting ready to have a baby in the next 7-8 weeks, especially in a hospital situation like this, I think that's really important. And then quickly, because we only have a couple more minutes left, I just wanted to say, from my experience, being of service, right? Being a husband to my wife, that experience I actually felt brought us so much closer together. Yeah. And I want to just say this to all the men that are maybe watching because their partners are making them watch or holding the phone up for them to watch, but you have a chance to be an active participant in the most important day of your life, on the day of your child's birth. And it is like, it's like this extreme moment where things feel like they're moving in slow motion, but it goes by like that.
100%.
And no matter how long the birth is, you have opportunities to show the best version of yourself. Mm-hmm. And I found myself in these situations where, like, literally Emily and I were in the same, this is TMI, we were in the same positions that we were in when we made the baby, right? like she's bent over. It looks like we're in doggy style, but I'm massaging her lower back. And it's intimate, and it can be beautiful, and it can be strangely sexy, and it can be a moment of connecting. Like, I remember when they asked me to get in the birth pool, I was like, let's go. I jumped in, and there's stuff floating around the pool, and you could look at it as a dude and be like, oh, that's nasty. Or you could be like, shit, what an experience, and what a moment to be there for her, like, to support. And we were in that thing for almost 6 hours, and the baby didn't come, and then we moved, but like, just having the chance and looking back, I would have so much remorse and regret, I think, if I wasn't there, like, with her. And the funny is, she didn't even know I was there half the time. As you know, like,
she's doing her own thing. Yeah.
By the way, the same thing happens in the hospital. Sorry, go ahead.
No, if you apply the same, just to kind of take it to guys who have a mentality and a fear of doing things, like this, because they don't know what they're like. The YOLO mentality, I'll jump out of an airplane, I'll go on a boys trip, I've never been to, I'll do X, Y, and Z. Yeah. Think of it the same way. You only get one shot, maybe two, maybe three, whatever, but each one per kid, for sure. You only live once in this regard, and you get this chance, right? Why are you gonna? If you don't, you always regret the things you never did. So just do it, and you can always say I didn't like it. But if you don't, Sam, I am green eggs and ham. It's like the lesson you learn from kids. So I think that's the important thing. You said you get one chance.
And then also, again, not being attached, because when we had our second baby, we thought we were gonna have a home birth, and we had to transfer.
Yeah.
And when we transferred, I was super emotional, but I didn't want to show Emily. I was like driving the car and I was crying, but I was pretending like I was cool because that's what we do as men.
You're Fonzie, yeah.
But when I got there, I realized that, again, everybody wanted the same thing. And I had the opportunity on behalf of my wife to advocate for what she wanted, which was a home birth feeling, meaning no intervention, meaning like we dimmed the room, we lit candles. And I was very clear. I told our backup doctor who came in, I said, I want to catch the baby.
Yeah.
And he said, come on over.
Yeah.
Right. And I was just like, I was right there, because getting a chance to be at the birth canal, watching saying prayers for my child as it comes into this world is one of the most important magical experiences I've ever had in my life. And for any man out there who feels like it's going to ruin the sex thing, it's not.
No, it's not.
Your brain changes it. It's different.
Yeah. By the way, when I felt Wish's nose pop out of Satya, and we connected, literally, I felt a shiver go through my spine, and we connected. A connection we've had every day ever since with my daughter, that changed my life. Like, I didn't know that, and the same thing with Sage. I mean, we held him in for a couple minutes, waiting to kind of breathe, and this experience of touching him and feeling him and understanding him was wild. Wow. I
remember brushing, I remember like touching my daughter's head to let her, and talking to her as she was coming out, letting her know that she's here.
And I was scared shitless. I was scared. I had no idea what this thing was doing. I had no idea, but I'm scared. But I'm so glad I did it. So glad.
But yeah, and you dive into that fear, because on the other end of that fear is bliss.
Yeah, always.
So, and then just real quick, and then when we had to do it in the hospital, I remember, right when that baby came out, the nurse, because that's her job, she tried to take the baby. And I literally said, no. They tried to wipe the baby off, and I said, no, because this was our experience. Totally. And I got to give the baby to Emily the way that it was supposed to be, the way that we had talked about her wanting it. Yeah. And it was an amazing experience. All that to say, this might not be the experience that you have in the next 6 weeks.
Agreed.
And that is okay.
Yep.
Just remember, the point of this is to advocate, to use your voice. If you are not allowed a birth partner in the room right now, to raise your voice and to start a petition, and we will help amplify it. My understanding
is that most states, it is on hospital by hospital basis, but but most states are stepping up
and allowing it.
And making sure that hospitals have to allow it, but maybe it's one person. So if it's one person, it's you as the birth partner. Step up to the game. Don't be afraid. Be afraid, but still do it. There's a lot of things we do that we're afraid.
And if you're open to it, and a lot of women are looking at home birth for the first time, I've had one home birth, one hospital birth, and they were both magical.
Yeah.
So there's no one way to have a baby, and I think that's the key to all of this, is just making sure that you know your rights. And as men, for the men that are watching this, that you know that this is scary and it's intense, but there's no greater ecstasy in the world than being an active participant and of service.
Agreed.
During the birth of your child. I love you, man. This was
awesome. I love
you
too. Yeah.
Thanks for doing this. If you're watching this, follow We Are AMMA. Follow Jeffrey to learn more. They're going to be posting a ton of stuff from doulas and midwives and all the different things that you can know during this time, during this crazy time. And just remember, you are enough. You got this. And you are protected, and it will all work out, because everybody wants the same thing, which is they want you to have a healthy, safe birth.
Agreed 100%.
All right.
Love you.
Love you, man.
See ya.
Bye. Thanks, guys.